The air at Belle Rêve Plantation had a weight to it, a thickness that clung to the skin like a damp shroud. It was a mixture of jasmine and decay, of sweet magnolia and the brackish rot of the nearby swamp. For most, this was simply the smell of a South Carolina summer. But for Alara, it was a language. She could parse the air, separating the notes of sun-baked earth from the green tang of crushed sugarcane, the metallic hint of coming rain from the cloying perfume that drifted from the grand house. Alara possessed a gift or a curse, depending on the day. Her sense of smell was unnaturally keen. She could identify a person from 50 paces by their unique scent, tell if a fruit was ripe to the very moment of perfection, or catch the faintest whiff of sickness on a person before any fever showed. It was a secret she kept guarded, a strange part of her that set her apart in the slave quarters, a place where being different was dangerous. Her world was small, defined by the back-breaking work in the sugarcane fields under a merciless sun and the fleeting moments of peace she found with her younger sister Lila. Lila was everything Alara was not. Where Alara was quiet and watchful, Lila was a splash of sunlight, her laughter a melody that could, for a moment, make them forget the chains that bound them, both seen and unseen. Lila smelled of wild honey and youth, a pure, sweet scent that Alara cherished above all others. The source of the plantation's most dominant and unsettling aroma was its mistress, Evangeline Dubois. She was a woman carved from porcelain and ice, her beauty as legendary in Charleston society as her husband's wealth. But her true obsession was not her silks or her jewels. It was her perfume. She crafted it herself in a locked chamber off her private apartments known as the still room. No one was ever permitted inside, save for the mistress herself. The fragrance was unlike anything else. It was intoxicating, a complex symphony of florals with an undercurrent of something warm, musky, and deeply personal. The ladies of Charleston would beg for a vial, but Mistress Evangeline never sold it. It was hers alone. She wore it like a second skin, and the scent preceded her everywhere, a fragrant announcement of her presence. To Alara, the perfume was a dissonance in the air. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but beneath the layers of rose, tuberose, and something exotic she couldn't name, there was another note. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It was the scent of fear. The disappearances began subtly. A field hand, a young man named Joseph, was said to have run off. It was a common enough occurrence, but Joseph had a wife and a newborn child. He wouldn't have left them. Then, a few months later, a girl named Sarah, who worked in the laundry, vanished. The overseer claimed she'd been sold, but no one saw the traders come. Each time someone disappeared, they were always the same, young, strong, and full of life. And each time, a few weeks later, the mistress's perfume would seem to deepen, to take on a new, vibrant note that hadn't been there before. The other slaves whispered behind their hands, their eyes wide with a terror they couldn't name. They spoke of conjure, of dark spirits in the swamp. But Alara, with her unique perception, suspected something far more tangible and far more monstrous. She noticed that the lingering scent of Sarah, a clean, simple smell of soap and sunshine, seemed to be woven, like a ghostly thread, into the mistress's perfume. It was impossible, a trick of the mind, she told herself. But the thought, once planted, began to grow, wrapping its roots around her heart. Life in the main house was a different kind of servitude. It was a world of polished floors, hushed footsteps, and constant vigilant observation. A dropped spoon or a dusty corner could earn you a lashing. When Alara was called up from the fields to work in the kitchens, her first feeling was a cold dread. The proximity to the mistress was a dangerous honor. Her talent, however, had been noticed. Not her sense of smell, but its practical application. She could blend herbs for cooking with an instinct that bordered on artistry, and her ability to sort and cure tobacco leaves by scent alone had reached the ears of the master, Armand Dubois. He was a man of commerce, and he saw a tool, not a person. Working in the house brought Alara closer to the source of her fear. The still room was at the end of a long, quiet hallway on the second floor, its heavy oak door always shut, a brass keyhole a dark, unblinking eye. The air around it was saturated with the mistress's fragrance, so potent it made Alara's head spin. Sometimes she would be sent to polish the silver sconces in that hall, and she would linger, her head tilted, trying to decipher the scents that bled from beneath the door. She could smell the base components now. Moroccan rose oil, rare and expensive. Tuberose, so strong it was almost narcotic. Ambergris, the scent of the deep ocean. But behind it all was that other note, the one that made the hairs on her arms stand up. It was organic, coppery, and sweet in a way that turned the stomach. It was the scent of life, but twisted, broken down, and repurposed. One afternoon, while she was scrubbing the hallway floor, Mistress Evangeline herself emerged from the room. She didn't seem to notice Alara, a silent figure on her knees. The mistress's face was flushed, her eyes bright with a feverish intensity. She held a small crystal vial in her hand, filled with a shimmering golden liquid. She raised it to the light, a smile of profound satisfaction on her lips. It was a private, unguarded moment, and in it, Alara saw not just a proud artisan, but a predator who had just secured her prize. As the mistress swept down the hall, her silken dress whispering against the floorboards, a wave of her perfume washed over Alara. This time, it was different, fresher, more potent. And woven deep within it, unmistakable to her senses, was the scent of a young man named Thomas, a stable hand who had been reported as a runaway just the week before. He had always smelled of hay, horsehide, and a particular wild mint he chewed on. The mint was there, a ghost in the floral storm, and Alara had to press her hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. Her suspicion was no longer a vague fear. It was a certainty, a cold, hard stone in the pit of her stomach. The beautiful, intoxicating perfume of Belle Rêve was a lie. It was not a garden in a bottle. It was a graveyard. The slave quarters breathed a collective sigh of exhaustion as night fell. The oppressive heat of the day gave way to a swamp-chilled air, and the sounds of cicadas rose to a deafening chorus. It was in these precious hours of darkness that news and whispers were exchanged, away from the watchful eyes of the overseer. Alara found old Jacob sitting on a stool outside his cabin, carving a piece of wood with a gnarled, steady hand. He was the oldest soul on the plantation, his skin a roadmap of his long, hard life. He had been at Belle Rêve since before Master Dubois was born, and it was said he saw everything. "Something troubles you, child," he said without looking up, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. Alara sat on the ground near him, hugging her knees. She couldn't bring herself to speak the whole truth. It was too insane, too monstrous. "Jacob, you remember Sarah? From the laundry?" He nodded, his knife shaving a thin curl from the wood. "A good girl, hard worker." "And Thomas, from the stables?" Another nod. "Strong lad, good with the horses. They say they ran." Alara whispered, her voice tight. "But it don't feel right." Neither of them was the running kind. Jacob finally paused his carving and looked at her. His eyes, clouded with age, were sharp and perceptive. "Some things on this plantation ain't meant to be understood. They're meant to be survived." "But what if they didn't run?" Alara pressed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What if something took them?" "There are many things that take our people," Jacob said, his gaze drifting towards the distant glow of the main house. The fever, the bite of a snake, the overseer's whip, and the mistress's needs. The last words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. "Her needs? What do you mean?" Jacob leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper. "The first Mistress Dubois, the master's mother, she was a plain woman. But this one, her beauty is her power, and she is terrified of losing it. She came here from the islands, from a place where they practice things, old things, ways of keeping youth, of stealing vitality." He tapped his temple. "They say a person's essence, their very life force, has a scent, and a woman who knows the old ways can capture it." It was a folk tale, a dark story to scare children, yet it echoed Alara's own impossible discovery. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The disappearances of the young and vibrant, the locked, still room, the perfume that smelled of stolen lives. She's putting them in her perfume? Ilara breathed the words and they tasted like poison. Jacob's face was grim. He didn't confirm or deny it. He simply placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. You are a smart girl, Ilara. Too smart, maybe. You see things, you notice things. In this place, a gift like that is a heavy burden. Don't go looking into the shadows. You won't like what you find, and what you find will surely find you. His warning was meant to scare her into silence, but it had the opposite effect. It solidified her resolve. This was not just about the lost souls of Sarah and Thomas. It was about who might be next. And a terrible, chilling thought entered her mind as she pictured her sister, Lila, laughing in the sunlight, her scent so pure and full of life. She was exactly the kind of flower Mistress Evangeline would want to pluck for her bouquet. Ilara's world shrank. The grand house, once just a place of work, became a gilded cage, each polished surface reflecting her own frightened eyes. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of a silken gown, sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She performed her duties with a mechanical precision, her mind constantly racing, observing, and calculating. She watched the mistress. She studied her routines, the way she floated through the rooms, her presence announced by that ever-present cloying fragrance. Evangeline's beauty was indeed remarkable. Her skin was smooth and luminous, her eyes clear, her movements fluid with a youthfulness that seemed at odds with the whispers Ilara had overheard about her true age. She was a work of art, but Ilara now saw the ghastly truth of the canvas. One morning, Ilara was tasked with delivering a tray of herbal tea to the mistress's chambers. The door was ajar, and as she approached, she heard voices from within. It was Master Armand and his wife. Another one, Evangeline? Armand's voice was low, laced with a weary frustration. The overseer is complaining. It raises questions. It makes the others restless. Restlessness is a small price to pay for this. Evangeline's voice was smooth as honey, but with a steel core. Look at me, Armand. The ladies in Charleston wither like last year's cotton, but I remain. Is that not what you desire? A wife who is the envy of all? I desire discretion, he countered. This is a business, my dear. Our assets are valuable. These disappearances are costly. A skilled artist does not begrudge the cost of her materials. She replied coolly, You manage your ledgers, husband, and allow me to manage my preservation. It is for your benefit, after all. A beautiful wife reflects well on a man. There was a pause, and then the sound of the master sighing in resignation. Just be careful. I want no trouble. Ilara's blood ran cold. He knew. Master Dubois didn't know the gruesome details, perhaps, or perhaps he chose not to. But he knew his wife was consuming their people for her vanity, and his only concern was the cost and the inconvenience. There was no help to be found there. They were all just assets on a ledger, items to be used and discarded at the whim of their owners. She backed away from the door silently, the tea tray rattling in her trembling hands. She felt a profound and suffocating isolation. She was a witness to an unspeakable evil, trapped in the monster's lair, and the monster's keeper was complicit. She had no one to turn to, no one to trust except herself. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on her, threatening to crush her. But beneath the fear, a hard knot of anger was beginning to form. They would not take anyone else. She would not let them. An opportunity, perilous and slim, presented itself a week later. Master Dubois was called away to Savannah on urgent business, a trip that would keep him gone for at least 3 days. His absence shifted the dynamics of the house. The overseer grew lax, and the mistress, with her husband away, seemed to retreat further into her own world, spending almost all her time in or near the still room. Ilara knew she needed more than just the evidence of her nose. She needed proof, something tangible, something that could not be dismissed as the fanciful fear of a slave. The master's study, a room she was normally forbidden to enter, became her target. It was where he kept his books, his ledgers, his records of every transaction on the plantation. On the second night of his absence, after the house had fallen into a deep slumber, Ilara slipped from the servants' quarters. The moon was a sliver in the sky, casting long, menacing shadows across the lawn. The main house loomed before her, a dark behemoth with only a single light burning in an upstairs window, the window to the mistress's chambers, adjacent to the still room. She entered through the kitchen, her bare feet making no sound on the cool stone floor. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every groan of the house's settling timbers sounded like a footstep. She navigated the labyrinthine corridors by memory, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The study door was unlocked. Inside, the room smelled of old paper, leather, and the faint, lingering scent of the master's cigar smoke. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating the rows of books and the massive oak desk that dominated the room. Her hands shook as she lit a small tallow candle, shielding its flame. Where to begin? She went straight to the desk, her eyes scanning for the plantation ledgers. She found them, thick leather-bound volumes. There was one for crop yields, one for equipment, and one for property. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The pages were filled with the master's neat sloping script. Names, ages, and values were listed in cold, calculated columns. She ran her finger down the page, her breath catching as she found them. Joseph, male, 25, prime field hand. A line was drawn through his name, and in the margin, the word, fled. The same notation was next to Sarah's name and Thomas's. But then she found something else. Tucked into the back of the ledger was a smaller, private book. Its cover was unmarked. She opened it. The handwriting was the same, but the entries were different. They weren't names, but dates. And next to each date was a brief cryptic note. June 12, 1846. Acquisition tuberose, strong note. Result, excellent. October 7, 1846. Acquisition sandalwood, earthy note. Result, satisfactory. February 20, 1847. Acquisition jasmine, sweet note. Result, superb. Ilara's mind raced. She went back to the main ledger. Joseph had fled on June 10th. Sarah had been sold in early October. Thomas had run on February 18th. The floral descriptions, tuberose, jasmine, they were lies. They were code. The master was cataloging his wife's victims, noting the quality of the essence she had harvested. A wave of nausea washed over her. This was the proof she sought, cold and damning. But it was also a death sentence. To be found with this book in her hands would mean a fate worse than a quick whipping. She memorized the dates, the words, burning them into her mind. As she carefully closed the book and placed it exactly where she had found it, she heard a sound from the hallway, the soft creak of a floorboard upstairs. Panic seized her. She blew out the candle, plunging the room into darkness, and pressed herself into the shadows behind a heavy velvet curtain. She held her breath, listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving down the main staircase. A soft glow appeared in the hallway, the light of a candle. Through a small gap in the curtains, Ilara watched as Mistress Evangeline drifted into view. She was in her nightgown, her hair unbound, looking ethereal and ghostly in the candlelight. She was not heading for the study. Instead, she paused in the main foyer, lifting her candle and examining her reflection in a large gilt mirror. She turned her head this way and that, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. She looked like a woman deeply in love with her own image. Then, her gaze drifted upward, as if looking towards the slave quarters, and her expression changed. It became appraising, hungry. It was the look of a gardener contemplating which flower to cut next. The moment stretched into an eternity. Finally, the mistress turned and ascended the stairs as silently as she had come. Ilara waited until the last flicker of her light was gone before she dared to breathe again. She had the proof, but now she also knew, with chilling certainty, that the gardener was already looking for a new bloom. The world seemed to sharpen after that night. Every glance from the mistress felt like a physical touch, cold and assessing. Ilara threw herself into her work, trying to be invisible, but her fear for Lila was a constant, sickening thrum beneath the surface of her composure. Lila was blossoming. At 13, she was on the cusp of womanhood, her limbs long and graceful, her spirit undimmed by the hardships of their life. She worked in the gardens near the main house, tending the very flowers the mistress used for the more innocent components of her perfumes. And Mistress Evangeline had begun to notice her. It started with small things. a lingering gaze as Lila carried a basket of rose petals, a soft-spoken compliment on the brightness of her eyes, delivered as the mistress passed by. Each remark was a poisoned dart that struck Alara's heart. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a rare moment of kindness from their aloof mistress. To Alara, it was the cold appraisal of a butcher. The mistress said my smile was like a sunny day. Lila told Alara one evening, her face alight with a shy pride. Alara's stomach twisted. Don't pay her no mind, Lila. Her words are like swamp gas. They smell sweet for a moment, but they're poison. You're just jealous, Lila teased, though she saw the fear in her sister's eyes. What's wrong, Alara? You've been jumpy as a frog on a hot rock lately. How could she explain a horror that had no name? How could she tell her sweet, innocent sister that the woman in the grand house wanted to bottle her essence to wear her life as a fragrance? Lila would think she'd lost her mind, so Alara began to shadow her sister. She made excuses to be near the gardens when Lila was working. She watched from windows in the main house, her hands clenched every time the mistress's silk dress appeared among the flower beds. She tried to make Lila seem less appealing. She would smudge dirt on Lila's cheek, telling her it was a charm against sun sickness. She would find fault with her work, hoping a reprimand from the overseer would make her seem less perfect, less vibrant. Her efforts were in vain. It was Lila's spirit, her inner light, that the mistress craved, and that was something Alara could not hide. The turning point came one sweltering afternoon. Alara was polishing silver in the dining room, a task she despised for its tediousness. The large windows looked out over the main lawn, which sloped down towards the gardens. She saw Mistress Evangeline walking with a parasol, and she saw Lila, kneeling by a bed of lavender. The mistress stopped and spoke to Lila. Alara couldn't hear the words, but she could see the scene unfold like a nightmare. Evangeline reached out and gently touched a lock of Lila's hair. Then she leaned in closer, as if to smell a flower, her nose hovering near Lila's neck. Lila froze, a frightened fawn cornered by a predator. Mistress Evangeline straightened up, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. It was the same smile Alara had seen that night in the hallway, the smile of an artist who had found her perfect material. In that moment, Alara knew. The decision had been made. Lila's name was next in the secret ledger. The clock was ticking, and the time for caution was over. The time had come for a desperate, terrifying plan. Desperation drove Alara to the one person who might listen, the one person whose skepticism was matched only by his strength. Samuel. He was a blacksmith, his powerful arms and steady gaze a comfort in the turbulent world of Bel Rev. He and Alara had a quiet understanding, a bond forged in shared glances and unspoken sympathies. But he was a practical man, a man of iron and fire, not of spirits and scents. She found him at dusk by the forge, the embers casting a warm glow on his face. He was banking the fire for the night, his movements economical and sure. "Samuel," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I need to talk to you, somewhere private." He saw the raw fear in her eyes and simply nodded, leading her to the quiet space behind the stables. There, with the smell of hay and horses around them, Alara told him everything. She told him about her sense of smell, about the scent of the missing people woven into the mistress's perfume. She told him about the conversation she overheard between the master and mistress, and about the secret ledger in the study. Samuel listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, the silence stretched out, thick and heavy. "Alara," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "That's a heavy tale, a fearsome one, but it's a fantasy, a dark dream brought on by grief and fear. The mistress is a cruel woman, yes. They all are. But to do that, to make perfume from..." He couldn't even say the words. "It's not possible." "My nose does not lie, Samuel," she insisted, her voice cracking with frustration. "And the book, I saw it with my own eyes. The dates match. She's not making perfume. She's a monster, and she's chosen Lila next. I saw the way she looked at her today. She touched her, Samuel. She smelled her." The intensity of her conviction gave him pause. He had always known Alara was different, more perceptive than most. He looked at her face, etched with terror and resolve, and saw not madness but a terrible sanity. Even if what you say is true," he said slowly, the gears of his practical mind turning. "What can we do? We are slaves. She is the mistress. Her word against ours is the wind against a mountain. We can't fight her," Alara said, the kernel of her plan finally taking voice. "So we have to run. Me and Lila. We have to get away from here tonight before she has a chance to take her." Running was a death sentence. The patrols, the dogs, the vast, unforgiving swamp that surrounded Bel Rev, the odds were impossible. Samuel had seen men try to run before. He'd seen what was left of them when they were brought back. "It's suicide, Alara. Staying is suicide." She shot back, grabbing his arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "It's a slower death, but it's death all the same. Will you help us? I don't know the swamp paths. You do. You've hunted there. Please, Samuel. I am begging you. For my sister's life." He looked into her desperate eyes and saw the truth of her plea. Whether her story was a fantasy or a monstrous reality, her fear for Lila was real. The danger to her sister was real. And his feelings for Alara, feelings he had kept banked like the embers of his forge, were real too. To let her and her sister face the night alone was unthinkable. "All right," he said, his voice a low, reluctant rumble. "God help us all. Tonight, when the moon is at its highest, we'll need a diversion, something big enough to draw all eyes away from the swamp road." A flicker of an idea, born of fire and desperation, sparked in Alara's mind. A diversion. She knew just the thing. It would be an act of terrible destruction, but Bel Rev was already a place of terrible destruction. It was time to fight fire with fire. The plan was terrifyingly simple. Samuel would prepare a small bundle of supplies, cured meat, a water skin, a flint and steel, and hide it at the edge of the swamp. Alara's task was the diversion. She had to create a fire, one that was large and chaotic enough to throw the entire plantation into a panic. And there was only one place to do it that would serve both justice and purpose: the still room. The room was filled with flammable oils, alcohols, and chemicals. A fire there would be spectacular and swift. It would not only create the diversion they needed, but would also destroy the source of the evil, wiping the mistress's gruesome workshop from the face of the earth. As the house fell into its nightly stillness, Alara's heart beat a frantic rhythm. This was no longer about sneaking and observing. This was about acting. She had to get into the still room, a place she had only ever seen from the outside. She had one chance. The master was still away, and the mistress felt secure in her domain. She stole a small pry bar from the tool shed, its cold iron a heavy weight in her hands. Slipping through the darkened house was now a familiar terror. She reached the hallway, the air thick with the perfume that she now recognized as the stench of death. The door was, as always, locked. She wedged the tip of the pry bar into the seam between the door and the frame. She put her weight into it, her muscles screaming with the effort. The wood groaned in protest. She paused, listening, her ears straining for any sound. Nothing. She pushed again, a sharp crack echoing in the silent hall. The lock splintered, and the door swung inward with a soft sigh. She slipped inside, closing it behind her. The room was not what she expected. It was not a butcher's shop, but an alchemist's laboratory. Shelves lined the walls filled with glass jars of herbs, flowers, and spices. Copper alembics and retorts gleamed in the moonlight that streamed through a large window. A long workbench was covered in beakers, funnels, and glass stirring rods. It was a place of science, of precise and meticulous craft. But the smell, oh, the smell. Here at the source, it was overwhelming. The beautiful floral notes were just a mask. Underneath, the organic, coppery scent of processed life was suffocating. It clung to the air, the walls, to every surface, and in the corner of the room, she saw the true heart of the operation. There stood 3 large sealed porcelain vats, connected by a series of copper pipes and gauges. A low fire was burning under one of them, gently heating its contents. This was the core of the distillation process, and it was from these vats that the true horror emanated. On a small table beside them lay a collection of objects that made Alara's blood turn to ice. A small carved wooden bird, identical to one Joseph had made for his child. A faded blue ribbon, the kind Sarah always used to tie back her hair. And a small worn leather pouch of mint leaves, just like the one Thomas always carried. These were trophies, mementos of the ingredients. Tears of rage and grief streamed down Alara's face. She saw it all with perfect clarity now. The cold, scientific cruelty of it. The mistress wasn't just a monster. She was an artist, and her medium was the souls of her fellow human beings. Steeling herself, Alara moved to the workbench. She found what she was looking for. Large glass jugs of pure alcohol, used as a solvent in the perfume-making process. Her hands were steady now, her fear replaced by a cold, righteous fury. She uncorked one of the jugs. The scent was sharp and clean. With deliberate movements, she began to pour the liquid over the workbench, onto the shelves of dried herbs, and around the base of the porcelain vats. She would cleanse this place with fire. As Alara prepared to set her cleansing fire, a soft sound from the doorway made her freeze. The door, which she had pushed shut, creaked open. Standing there, silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway, was Mistress Evangeline. She held a single candle, its flame illuminating a face devoid of surprise. There was no shock, no anger, only a cold, appraising curiosity. "I had a feeling you might be drawn here," she said, her voice a silken whisper. "I've seen you watching. Your senses are acute. I can see it in your eyes. You can smell the truth, can't you?" Alara stood paralyzed, the empty jug still in her hand. The mistress glided into the room, her movements unnervingly calm. She took in the scene, the spilled alcohol, the pry bar on the floor, the look of horrified defiance on Alara's face. "Such a waste of good materials," she murmured, gesturing to the alcohol. "But I suppose curiosity must be satisfied. You wanted to see my work, my art. What do you think?" "You are a demon," Alara whispered, finding her voice. A small laugh escaped Evangeline's lips. "A demon? No. I am a preservationist. I take the fleeting, ephemeral beauty of youth and I make it eternal. Joseph's strength, Sarah's innocence, Thomas's vitality, they live on here in me. They are not gone. They are elevated." She took a step closer, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "I have been searching for my final note, the heart of the fragrance. I thought it would be your sister. She has the scent of pure sunlight, so vibrant. But now," the mistress inhaled deeply, her gaze fixed on Alara. You are something else entirely. There is fear, yes, but beneath it, there is defiance, resilience, a scent of wild, untamed earth. It is intoxicating, a bass note that could anchor all the others." The horrifying realization dawned on Alara. The mistress wasn't angry that she had been discovered. She was intrigued. She had found a new, rare ingredient. "You will not have me," Alara said, taking a step back. "Or my sister." "Oh, I think I will," the mistress said, her smile widening. "You came to destroy my work, little one. But instead, you have simply delivered my most perfect ingredient directly to my door. You will be my masterpiece." She set her candle down on the workbench. In the other hand, she held a small silk cloth. Before Alara could react, Evangeline lunged, not with the clumsiness of an attack, but with the swift, precise grace of a dancer. She pressed the cloth over Alara's mouth and nose. A sweet, overpowering scent filled Alara's senses. It was a concentrate, a powerful anesthetic distilled from some night-blooming flower. Her limbs grew heavy, her vision swam, the room tilting around her. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was the triumphant, beautiful face of Mistress Evangeline, leaning in close, inhaling her scent as she lost consciousness. Darkness gave way to a throbbing headache and the suffocating scent of chloroform. Alara awoke on the cold stone floor of the still room. Her hands were bound behind her back, a thick rope biting into her wrists. The room was bathed in the soft glow of several candles, casting dancing shadows that made the glass instruments look like instruments of torment. Mistress Evangeline was at her workbench, humming a soft tune as she measured liquids into a beaker. She was working, preparing. Ilara's stomach churned with terror. She was no longer a servant, a witness. She was now the raw material. "Ah, you are awake," the mistress said without turning around. "Excellent. The process is much more potent when the subject is conscious. Fear adds a certain sharpness to the essence." Panic gave Ilara a surge of adrenaline. She tested her bonds, twisting her wrists until the rope cut into her skin. They were tight, expertly knotted. She looked around frantically, her eyes darting from the gleaming alembics to the porcelain vats. Her plan was in ruins. She hadn't saved Lila. She had only managed to trap herself. But as Evangeline turned from the bench, holding a large, wicked-looking syringe, Ilara's gaze fell upon the candle the mistress had set down earlier. It was near the edge of the workbench, its flame flickering just inches from a puddle of the alcohol she had poured. It was a chance, a single, desperate, suicidal chance. "My sister," Ilara rasped, her throat dry. "What will you do with her?" "Lila?" The mistress paused, considering. "She will make a lovely top note, a bright floral accent. Perhaps next spring." That was all Ilara needed to hear. With a strength born of pure rage, she kicked out with her legs, slamming her feet against the leg of the workbench. The table shuddered violently. The beaker in Evangeline's hand flew from her grasp, shattering on the floor. But more importantly, the candle teetered on the edge for a moment and then fell. It landed directly in the puddle of alcohol. The result was instantaneous. A line of blue flame raced across the floor, igniting the alcohol-soaked wood of the workbench and the shelves. In a heartbeat, the room was engulfed in an inferno. The dried herbs and oils on the shelves went up like tinder, and the room filled with a thick, acrid smoke laced with the scent of 100 burning flowers. Evangeline shrieked, a sound of pure fury and disbelief. She was suddenly no longer a calm, collected artist, but a creature trapped in the destruction of her life's work. She beat at the flames with her hands, trying to save her precious notes, her glass jars cracking in the intense heat. The fire spread with terrifying speed, licking at the copper pipes that connected the vats. Ilara scrambled backwards on the floor, away from the heat, coughing as the smoke filled her lungs. The ropes that bound her were a death sentence. She was going to burn alive in this monstrous room. Then she felt a searing pain in her wrists. She looked down and saw that a tongue of flame from the floor had caught the edge of her rope bonds. The fibers glowed red, then began to burn. The pain was excruciating, but it was also hope. She thrust her hands deeper into the flame, gritting her teeth against the agony as the rope charred and weakened. With a final desperate wrench, the burnt rope snapped. Her hands were free. She staggered to her feet, her vision swimming from the smoke and pain. The mistress was a crazed silhouette in the middle of the roaring fire, trying to salvage a burning ledger, the book from the master's study. Her beautiful silk gown was smoldering. Ilara didn't hesitate. She stumbled towards the door, choking, her only thought to escape, to get to Lila. The fire was roaring now, the heat so intense it felt like it was melting her skin. Behind her, she heard a terrible hissing sound, followed by a loud groan of tortured metal. One of the heated porcelain vats, its contents boiling, had fractured under the strain. A thick, superheated, viscous liquid, the rendered essence of a human soul, spilled out onto the floor, instantly vaporizing in the inferno. The room was filled with a final, horrifying wave of perfume, the concentrated scent of a dozen stolen lives screaming in the flames. Ilara burst out into the hallway, collapsing to the floor, gasping for clean air. The fire alarm was being raised, shouts and screams echoing through the house. Belle Reve was awake and in chaos. The diversion was more successful than she could have ever imagined. Now, she just had to get to her sister. The grand house was a hive of frantic activity. Servants ran with buckets of water, their efforts laughably futile against the inferno that now consumed the entire second floor. Smoke billowed from the windows, thick and black, carrying the unholy scent of the still room's destruction across the plantation. In the confusion, Ilara was just another terrified slave fleeing the flames. No one noticed the raw, burned flesh on her wrists, or the wild, determined look in her eyes. She fought her way through the panicked crowd, pushing towards the back of the house, towards the path that led to the quarters. She found Lila huddled with a group of other women and children, their faces illuminated by the terrifying orange glow of the fire, their eyes wide with fear and awe. "Lila!" Ilara cried, grabbing her sister's arm. "Ilara, your hands! What happened?" Lila gasped, seeing the raw burns. "There's no time," Ilara said, her voice urgent and low. "We have to go, now!" While everyone is watching the fire, Lila was confused, terrified. "Go? Go where? What's happening?" "I'll explain later. You have to trust me. Our lives depend on it." The authority in Ilara's voice, the raw desperation in her eyes, was enough. Lila nodded, her own fear of the fire now eclipsed by the fear she saw in her sister. Ilara pulled her away from the group, keeping to the shadows at the edge of the lawn, away from the chaos surrounding the burning house. They could hear the overseer shouting orders, trying to organize a chain of water buckets, his attention completely consumed by the preservation of the master's property. The fire was their shield, a wall of chaos that made them invisible. As they reached the edge of the trees that bordered the fields, a figure emerged from the darkness. For a heart-stopping moment, Ilara thought they were caught. But it was Samuel. His face was grim, his eyes reflecting the flames. "I saw the fire," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I hoped it was your signal. It's bigger than I ever imagined. The mistress caught me," Ilara explained breathlessly. "It was the only way." Samuel looked at her burned wrists, then at Lila's frightened face, and a new understanding dawned in his eyes. The story she had told him was not a fantasy. It was real. "The supplies are hidden by the old cypress tree at the swamp road. We have to move now before they think to count heads." He took the lead, guiding them through the familiar darkness of the sugarcane fields. Behind them, the fire roared, a great hungry beast devouring Bel Rev. It was a funeral pyre for the horrors that had taken place there, but it was also a beacon that signaled their escape, but one that would also surely signal a hunt once the flames died down and they were discovered to be missing. They were running against time, with the devil's fire at their backs. The swamp was a different world. The moment they stepped off the plantation road and into the morass, the air changed. The smoke of the fire was replaced by the thick, earthy smell of mud and decay. The sounds of the plantation, the shouting, the crackling flames, were swallowed by the chirping of insects and the deep croak of bullfrogs. Twisted cypress trees, draped in Spanish moss, rose from the dark, still water like ancient skeletons. For most slaves, the swamp was a place of terror, rumored to be filled with spirits, snakes, and gators, a place from which runaways never returned. But for Samuel, who had hunted and trapped here since he was a boy, it was a sanctuary. He knew its secret paths, its hidden solid ground, its ways of concealment. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice a beacon in the disorienting darkness. "Step where I step. There are soft spots that'll swallow you whole." Lila clung to Ilara's hand, her eyes wide with fear. Every splash of water, every rustle in the undergrowth, made her jump. Ilara, despite the throbbing pain in her wrists, felt a strange sense of calm. The dangers of the swamp were honest. A snake would bite you, a gator would attack you, the mud would pull you under. They were dangers you could see and fight. They were not like the smiling, perfumed evil of the grand house. Samuel moved with a quiet confidence, navigating by the stars that peeked through the thick canopy and by landmarks only he could see. He led them through knee-deep water, over fallen logs that served as bridges, and through thickets of saw palmetto that tore at their clothes. "We need to put as much distance between us and the plantation as we can before sunrise," he explained, pausing to let them catch their breath. "When the sun comes up, the overseer will send the dogs." The mention of the dogs sent a fresh wave of fear through them. They had all seen the hounds used to track runaways. They were relentless, vicious creatures. "Can they track us through the water?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "It's harder for them," Samuel said. "Water washes away the scent. That's why we're staying in the low ground. It's slower, but it's safer." As they moved deeper into the swamp, Ilara found her senses, which had been overwhelmed by the fire and smoke, beginning to return to their normal sharpness. She could smell the different kinds of mud, the sweet rot of decaying leaves, the night-blooming jasmine that grew wild in the trees. It was the scent of a raw, untamed world. It was the scent of freedom. The pain in her wrists was a constant, sharp reminder of the price of that freedom. The fire had taken something from her, but it had also given her something. It had cauterized a part of her soul, burning away the helpless fear and leaving behind a core of hard, unyielding resolve. She had faced the monster in its lair and had survived. Whatever the swamp threw at them, she knew they would face it together. Dawn broke not as a bright sunrise, but as a gradual lightening of the sky, the gray light filtering through the dense canopy in weak, dappled patterns. They had been moving for hours and exhaustion was setting in. Lila's initial terror had faded into a weary numbness, while the adrenaline that had fueled Alara was replaced by the deep, aching throb of her burns. They found a small island of solid ground, a hummock of earth raised a few feet above the water, and collapsed. Samuel shared out some of the dried meat and water. It was tasteless, but it was fuel. "We rest for an hour," he commanded. "Then we move again. We need to reach the river by nightfall." As they sat in the humid silence, a distant sound reached them, carried on the morning air. It was faint, but unmistakable. The baying of hounds. Lila's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "The dogs!" Samuel was already on his feet, his body tense, listening. "They're on the trail. They're faster than I thought." He scanned their surroundings, his practical mind assessing their options. The water didn't throw them off for long. The overseer must be with them. He knows how to work them. "What do we do?" Alara asked, her heart pounding. The sound of the dogs was the sound of capture, of failure, of a fate worse than death. "We can't outrun them in the long term," Samuel said, his voice grim. "We have to be smarter. We have to break the trail." He looked around, his eyes landing on a cluster of wild pepper plants growing on the edge of the hummock. An idea sparked. "Here," he said, pulling up a handful of the plants, crushing the spicy-smelling leaves and pods in his hands. "Rub this on the soles of your feet and the bottoms of your clothes. It's not perfect, but it might confuse their scent." They did as he said, the pungent smell of the pepper stinging their nostrils. Then they were moving again, not at a run, but at a steady, water-churning pace, plunging back into the swamp. The baying of the hounds grew louder, closer. They could hear the shouts of men now, the voice of the overseer, a familiar sound of menace that now seemed amplified by the swamp's acoustics. They were the hunted. Every shadow was an enemy, every sound a threat. The swamp, which had been their sanctuary, was now closing in on them, a trap with the hunters closing the door. Samuel led them to a deeper part of the water, a channel where a slow-moving current flowed. "This is our best chance," he said. "Stay in the water as much as you can. It'll be our only hope to wash the scent away." The water was up to their chests, cold and dark. They moved in a single file, Samuel in the lead, Alara and Lila following close behind. The baying of the hounds was maddeningly close now. They could hear them thrashing in the undergrowth at the edge of the water. The hunters were here. The dogs were in a frenzy at the water's edge, their barking echoing through the cypress trees. The overseer, a heavy-set man named Miller, cursed in frustration. He could see the trail ended at the murky channel. "They're in the water," he bellowed to the two men with him. "Spread out. Look for any sign of them on the opposite bank." Hidden behind the broad trunk of a fallen cypress tree just 50 yards away, Alara, Lila, and Samuel held their breath, submerged up to their necks in the cold water. They could see the figures of their pursuers, could hear their voices clearly. Lila was trembling uncontrollably, and Alara held her tight, trying to will her own desperate courage into her sister. Time seemed to slow down. The hunters moved along the bank, their eyes scanning the water, their rifles held at the ready. A water moccasin slithered past Alara's leg, and she had to bite her lip to keep from screaming. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, from far behind them, back in the direction of the plantation, a new sound arose. It was a single, high-pitched scream of pure agony and terror. It was a man's voice, followed by another, and then another. It wasn't the sound of a hunt. It was the sound of a slaughter. Miller and his men froze, turning to look back towards the plantation. Even the dogs fell silent for a moment, their ears perked. "What in God's name was that?" one of the men asked, his voice shaking. The sounds of chaos grew louder, more screaming, the splintering of wood, and a deep, guttural roaring that was not human. Miller's face, which had been set in a mask of grim determination, was now pale with confusion and a dawning fear. "Something's wrong," he muttered. "Something's gone wrong back at the house." The hunt was forgotten. The safety of the plantation, their fortress of power, was in question. "Back!" he shouted. "We're going back. Now!" He and his men plunged back into the swamp, crashing through the undergrowth in their haste to return, the dogs following at their heels. As their sounds faded into the distance, Samuel, Alara, and Lila remained hidden, trying to make sense of what they had just heard. "What was that?" Lila whispered, her teeth chattering. Samuel shook his head, his brow furrowed. "I don't know. It sounded like an attack." But Alara, she had a chilling suspicion. She thought back to the still room, to the boiling fractured vat. She remembered the science of it all, the careful process of distillation and preservation. What happened when that process was interrupted so violently? What happened to the essences that Mistress Evangeline had bottled? Were they just inert liquids? Or was there something of the life force, the rage and pain of the victims, still trapped within? She imagined the fire, the destruction, the release of all that concentrated agony. Perhaps the spirits of Joseph, Sarah, Thomas, and all the others had not been destroyed by the flames, but had been set free. A wave of vengeful, tormented energy unleashed upon their tormentors. The screams they heard were not from any natural beast of the swamp. It was the sound of Belle Reve finally reaping what it had sown. She didn't voice her thoughts. It was too fantastic, too terrifying. But as she looked back in the direction of the burning plantation, she felt not fear, but a sense of profound, terrible justice. The ghosts of Belle Reve were claiming their own. They did not wait to find out the source of the screams. The hunters' retreat was a gift, a reprieve they could not afford to waste. They pushed on through the swamp, their movements now fueled by a desperate, hopeful energy. The baying of the dogs was gone, replaced once more by the natural sounds of the wild. As afternoon faded into twilight, a new scent reached Alara's nose, cutting through the heavy smell of the swamp. It was the clean, fresh scent of moving water, of damp earth and river reeds. "The river," she breathed. Samuel nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. "We made it." They emerged from the tree line onto the muddy bank of a wide, slow-moving river. It was a lifeline, a pathway to the north, a current that could carry them far away from the horrors of South Carolina. Hidden in a thicket of reeds was a small, crudely made raft, a few logs lashed together, that Samuel had built and hidden weeks before. A secret dream of freedom he had never dared to act upon until now. As they pushed the raft into the water, Alara looked back one last time at the swamp that had both threatened and sheltered them. In the far distance, a thin column of smoke still rose into the darkening sky, the last remnant of Belle Reve. She thought of the Mistress, likely consumed by the fire she had created, a victim of her own monstrous art. She thought of the Master, who would return to find his fortune in ruins and his house a place of ghosts and terror. She looked down at her burned wrists. The pain was still there, but now it felt different. It was a scar, a brand of survival. It was the price she had paid to save her sister. She looked at Lila, whose face, though still pale and tired, held a glimmer of hope. She looked at Samuel, his strong hands guiding the raft into the current, his gaze fixed on the northern horizon. The current caught them, pulling them away from the shore, away from the past. The scent of the swamp faded, replaced by the clean, promising scent of the open river. Alara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in her life, the air didn't smell of magnolia and rot, of jasmine and fear. It smelled only of water, of night, and of the long, uncertain, and beautiful road to freedom that lay ahead. The story of Belle Reve was over. Their own story was just beginning.